Welcome to the Happy Lawyer Project. I'm your host, Akoma Moronu, and I created this show to help lawyers find happiness in life with a law degree. Together with my guest, we provide the knowledge, insight, skills, inspiration, and encouragement you need to find your happy. If you're anything like me, you've certainly had days when you thought that you wouldn't mind practicing law if you could do it on your own terms. Because it really is lack of predictability, the inability to take vacation, being a slave to the billable hour, and then all the politics around working at a firm or company. There's all the other stuff that isn't just practicing law. So what if you could? What if you could practice law on a contract basis, project by project, take on as much as you want, leave what you don't? Enter Julia Shapiro. Julia is the founder and CEO of Hire and Esquire. And if you're like me, you've probably Googled contract lawyer, and if you did, you know quite a bit about what Hire and Esquire does. And for those of you who don't, it's a wonderful service where lawyers can work directly with firms and companies to get contract-based, project-based legal work. Today, I chat with Julia about why she decided to found the company and what she has in store for the future of contract law for busy lawyers. And we chat about who would be best suited for this type of work, what to think about when taking on contract work, and how to prepare yourself to be a good candidate if it's something you want to consider in the future. So I think there's a lot to learn in this episode, and it's crazy interesting to hear about this whole other side of lawyering. Enjoy! Welcome back to the Happy Lawyer Project, guys. I am super excited to have Julia Shapiro on today with me, and I'm so excited to share what she has in the works and everything that it's taken for her to get there. Welcome, Julia.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
Yes, so I'm so happy you're here, and I think it would be really great if you could just start with a brief description of who you are and what it is that you do.
Sure. So I am the CEO of Hire and Esquire, and we are an on-demand legal workforce platform. And we help attorneys find freelance and permanent work, and we help law firms and in-house legal departments find attorneys on demand or for permanent roles.
So I mentioned to you before we started recording that I definitely looked into Hire and Esquire when I was on maternity leave, and I was sure I was going to quit big law and that there was no way I was ever going to make it work. So I'm super excited to dive into that. But before we start on Hire and Esquire, I'd love to hear a little bit about what I'd like to call your legal origin story. How did you decide to pursue law? What got you there? And how did you find practicing?
So I actually really enjoyed being a lawyer, and I didn't necessarily think from childhood I was going to be a lawyer. I tried out a bunch of different things. There were many different things that I wanted to do. In undergrad, I became a comparative literature major and I always loved reading, and I really loved the comparison and making arguments and structured logical writing. And I had always been fairly political and interested in politics and international affairs. And I know you worked in public interest. You worked with Amnesty. In high school, I was in Amnesty. I did a lot of those types of extracurricular activities that I was drawn to. So I became interested in law just because it seemed to blend a lot of my interests together. And I will say, unlike a lot of my peers, I had absolutely no family pressure. My parents didn't want me to go to law school. All of the lawyers they knew were miserable. They didn't completely discourage me. They supported me in whatever I wanted to do, but it wasn't like a, yay, you're going to law school or social pressures. So I ended up at law school, and I really loved it. I found those to be 3 great years where I made a lot of friends and did a lot of interesting things surrounding law school. I actually had always planned on going into public interest. Both of my parents were inner city school teachers, and growing up, I was very familiar with a lot of social issues that were going on that I wanted to help be a part of changing. And I went to undergrad and law school on scholarships, choosing schools where I could get scholarships because I knew I wanted to be able to pursue likely a career that it was in government or public interest. And in law school, I ended up on the big law track. You do really well your first year of law school. You get kind of swept into the on-campus recruiting. You get you get an offer, you see how much money there is to be made just as a summer associate that pays off all your living expense loans for the next year or two. And you think, maybe I'll do this for a couple of years and then I'll go do what I want after I have some savings. So I started on that path by being a summer associate. And then I actually got pretty sick my third year of law school and couldn't really figure out what was wrong with me. I got sick around Thanksgiving and just never got better. So by the time I took the bar, I never knew how I was going to feel any given day. I ended up turning down a federal clerkship and going into the contract world because I could arrange it around my doctor's appointments. So that was when I first discovered this contract attorney world. And I worked in this world for about a little under a year before I was diagnosed with celiac disease, which is basically you have an autoimmune reaction to eating gluten. So once I figured out what was wrong with me and started to get better, I didn't want to go back to the path I was on before. And I had really loved the people that I met doing contract work. I had always been fairly type A and overscheduled my entire life. And so the flexibility and the freedom of being a contract lawyer, I found very intoxicating and exhilarating. And I decided to stay on that path a little bit longer. And that was my legal path and how I ended up in the contract attorney world.
That's insane. So what kind of contract work were you doing right out of law school?
So I initially started out in document review. And at the same time that I was doing document review, I was still doing pro bono work with the family legal aid office that I had volunteered with during law school. And then I was able to actually take cases once I was a lawyer. So I was doing that in pro bono work and then also taking a couple of cases or doing a few things on the side for friends while I was a contract attorney. So that was the initial kind of contract career I put together. Then I ended up finding somewhat of a home as a contract attorney at Pepper Hamilton, and the recession hit and they weren't hiring as many associates. And I ended up going from document review to probably what would be more like staff attorney or maybe, junior associate level work of doing different things around litigation. I worked primarily in commercial litigation. So that was pretty much my contract career, was smattering of commercial litigation work and then some pro bono cases and a few things on the side that came up that were interesting.
So I think this transitions pretty nicely into something that you mentioned to me when asked about advice for being happy. And you said that in order to find happiness, you need to be able to identify outside expectations that are not part of your value system. Did you have outside expectations that you had to let go of?
I don't really think that I did, but I think that I am a rarity. I do think a lot of these expectations are set by your family and when you're growing up. And my parents always told me to do whatever made me happy and were very encouraging of my sister and I being very creative and exploring different things. So I found that I was able to do what I'm doing because I wasn't really worried about status or looking a certain way to the outside world. I did find a lot of people around me in law had gone to law school because there was an expectation or because they thought it looked good or sounded good. And that was really what was a challenge to them to being entrepreneurial or going to do what they really wanted to, was these expectations and what they thought they were supposed to be doing.
I completely agree. And I think I've found the same to be true in the people that I've talked to. I think those whose expectations are kind of internally driven and who don't come kind of from societal expectations or familiar expectations or gender norms or all these other things that kind of get handed down to us from who knows where. Those people tend to be the happiest, because they're really living life on their own terms. But it's hard because you don't realize that unless you're proactive about it, all of your beliefs were given to you by somebody. So I think it would be great now to transition into what you're doing over at Hire and Esquire. What was the problem you were trying to solve? It seems like you were able to find contract work, so there was obviously opportunities out there. Why did you decide to launch your own platform?
Because I really, really hate inefficiency. So I was a bit shocked when I was in the contract world. I saw this world from the perspective of being an attorney. And as I stayed at Pepper longer, I was helping with some parts of the staffing process. And I was really surprised at, I can't think of a more eloquent word for this, but how much it sucked on both sides. So the process was very manual and very mid-century. Staffing agencies were using the phone to call candidates, call their clients. There was a lot of faxing still going on as late as 2011. They were emailing resumes piecemeal. It was this horrible, really, again, mid-century antiquated process, and it created issues on both sides. So for the attorneys, you felt like you were going through this recruiter gatekeeper to get to projects, and you often never figured out what happened with the project. There was no direct line of communication, and there would be an emergency. The recruiter would reach out to everybody, say there was a project. Everybody would frantically send in their resumes, and the recruiter might follow up with you when they really needed you, and then suddenly everything would drop and you wouldn't hear anything. And that was a big complaint from attorneys. And you see that the poor recruiter was tasked with doing way too many different jobs and way too much manual work, and could not get back to everybody on time and really give people the attention they needed because of how many different tasks and things that they were juggling. From the law firm perspective or the in-house legal department perspective, when they needed contract workers, they were also dealing with tons of paperwork and friction and trying to catch people on the phone. And essentially the whole thing was a huge game of telephone. So it really sucked for everybody, and everybody felt like it was sloppy and haphazard and they weren't getting the attention or information that they needed. So to me, it seemed really obvious that this whole process should be online. And I also had a lot of friends outside of big law who were also putting together somewhat of freelance careers, and they were looking on Craigslist for small firms. A lot of small firms and mid-sized practices were using Craigslist as a way to connect with contract labor. And that was also very clunky. It was better than a recruiter and it was cheaper than a recruiter, but it was still really clunky. So initially, I didn't think about starting Hire an Esquire. I thought that a product must exist that was already online, and I went to look for it. And after a couple of days of Googling, I couldn't find any service that was essentially, now it's called Upwork, but there was Odesk and Elance at the time. I couldn't find an Odesk Elance for freelance lawyers. And so then I became obsessed with building it. And that's when I transitioned into Hire an Esquire.
And did you have any background in entrepreneurial endeavors or building, software, web development, any of it?
Not really. I had done some basic programming and coding as a hobby, nothing intense or nothing like building a software application. As far as being an entrepreneur, I really didn't have any. I guess maybe there was some predisposition. My sister is also an entrepreneur, and we're still not quite sure how, because our parents were both teachers in this very structured job. But growing up, my sister did not want to play. Well, she was really into sports, but she didn't want to play games normal kids played, and especially games that little girls played. There was no dolls and Barbies. My sister wanted to play store, and she wanted a cash register. So when we were little, we would play games that were like, we were playing business basically. And then I laugh because I joke my sister was the first person to make babysitting scalable. So my sister wasn't content with just taking lots of babysitting jobs once she became 11 or 12 and was old enough to babysit. She decided she would start in the summer like a camp where she would have a bunch of kids, and it would be cheaper than necessarily hiring a babysitter. And then it would obviously be a lot more income because you'd have volume. And of course, being her younger sister, she enlisted me to be her assistant and paid me a little bit of money to help her. And she was the main business owner. So I think there were some things growing up that that my sister and I did that probably changed the way I thought of it. But I hadn't really had any entrepreneurial experience before that, aside from the other major exposure for me that was fairly eye-opening. I went to University of Southern California for undergrad school, and it was a very different environment than the one I had grown up in. It was a very entrepreneurial environment. A lot of the students that I was around, their parents were entrepreneurs. USC has a very strong business and entrepreneurship program. A lot of my peers were starting businesses in college. So I was exposed to that in college. And it was very eye-opening to watch how my peers were thinking differently and how they were going about setting up their own businesses.
I love that story about your sister because I think her and I would have been really good friends, because one of my favorite games growing up was IKEA, basically. And I would like get catalogs, and like my sisters could order stuff and I would make invoices for them.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So that was one of my favorite. And I also started a babysitters club where I would hire out other babysitters and they would pay me a cut
So
of their babies. So we had a very similar trajectory, your sister.
Yes. So you made Odesk for babysitters, basically.
Correct. In 1995 or whatever it was.
That's amazing.
Well, I would find the jobs and then I would service them out because I could only watch so many people by myself. But
so I'm guessing you're a great rainmaker at your law firm.
I think business development is one of my favorite parts of practice. And I think that's why I often tell people that if you can make it to kind of that mid-level, get past that mid-level hump, it gets better. Because for me, the project management, like delegation, kind of I get to do the parts of the job that I enjoy, and I don't have to do all the grunt work anymore. And so that for me makes it way, way better and more enjoyable.
Nice.
So let's talk about what the Hire an Esquire actually does. So you talked about the problem you were trying to solve and how there were all these inefficiencies. So you create this platform. What can a lawyer do on the platform? What can they expect when they sign up? How does it work?
So the platform does a few things to smooth out the recruiting process, and very differently than your typical agency or brick and mortar recruiter. So when you sign up, you will be verified. And we have a process for screening and vetting and verifying our attorneys that is part human and part machine. So we have some automated things to verify that you are in good standing with the bar and your identity. So there's some processes you will go through for that. And then once you are verified, there's additional screening, including reference checks and candidate assessments. And some of these things might be new. We've added a lot of these things in the last 1 to 2 years. So depending on when you signed up, I know that you said your older son is 3 years old. So if you signed up before that, it's changed a lot since then. So there's a onboarding process that you can expect where we assess you as a candidate and verify you as a candidate. And then once you're verified and accepted, and we changed also over the last 1 to 2 years where we don't necessarily, it's more of an application process. We don't accept all candidates. It's based on a bunch of different factors that we've picked up are important for qualities for people to have who are flexible attorneys. And also sometimes we will slow down the acceptance process based on the jobs that are available in our system. So once you get through that process and we find that you're a good fit to work through us, you will have access to our system where you can search for jobs and you can set up your profile. And a lot of our clients also don't post jobs publicly and they just search for candidates. So if you are a candidate, you might not see a job posted, but you might be messaged or selected to apply for a job that's not in our greater system. So that's what you can expect from the initial process of engaging with a job on Hire an Esquire. Once you are selected for a job, also all throughout inside our application, you can message back and forth with the person who's interested in hiring you, and you verify you accept the job in our system, and then billing and time tracking is set up. And then you log your hours and you get paid automatically every week when the person that you're working for, the law firm or in-house legal department, approves your hours.
That seems pretty simple and straightforward. So I think what it probably comes down to is what kind of people are you looking for? What kind of qualities, or maybe it has more to do with what kind of jobs are more outsourceable, contractable. I don't know if that's the right way to say that. So I guess for lawyers who are thinking about something like Hire an Esquire or like the idea of it, what do they need to consider personally or professional to be a good candidate?
So I think that there's two things. There's skill sets and then there's personality. So from a skill set perspective, we are seeing a lot more jobs become contract that did not used to be contract. I would say the most popular jobs right now are associate level jobs. They would have been associate level partner track probably 5 to 10 years ago. And now law firms are hiring contract attorneys and generally people with big law backgrounds as our in-house legal department. So I would say a mid-level to senior associate level position in a variety of areas. It can be mergers and acquisitions, it can be privacy, it can be cybersecurity, it can be social media. There's a whole variety of things that just basically hot areas of law that are associate level positions that are now contract. In addition to that, we've really been growing our base of small to mid-size clients. So solos and small practices and mid-size law firms, those tend to be more litigation heavy roles. So really great place right now for people who can go to court appearances, can act as local counsel, or who have a background in litigation, particularly insurance defense and those types of areas. Another high growth area we're seeing, and we're actually opening up a part of our platform for non-lawyers now, are contracts professionals. So paralegals and contracts administrators and people that are good at, or people that have the skills to review and redline and understand large volume and manage large volumes of contracts for in-house legal departments.
Gosh, that's an amazing resource. I can only imagine how many people need that at every
yes.
firm.
Completely.
I completely forgot what I was going to say. I got so blown away by the idea of being able to hire out another paralegal. I was going to ask about conflict. So do you guys handle conflicts? Do you guys handle like professional liability insurance, all that kind of overhead stuff? Or does the lawyer need to kind of look out for themselves and get that in place before considering something like this?
So we manage that. And that is one thing that really sets us apart. Some other marketplaces have shot up. They do tend to be more consumer focused. They're not really focused on enterprise hiring. So this is sometimes the misconception. We are not direct to clients, if that makes sense. We are law firm hiring additional lawyers or a large corporation that already has an attorney on staff or a legal department hiring on-demand talent, essentially. So it's different than an engagement model where you're working directly with the clients. So a lot of legal marketplaces that have shot up are more focused towards, working with startups or working with consumers. And we are focused on what you need to do to work with enterprises, which means we act as the employer of record. So the attorneys for most projects, we do some independent contractor work, but the majority of our projects we are the employer of record, and we're providing health insurance once you work for us full time for a certain amount of time. And we also provide liability insurances. So it's a little different than malpractice because we're staffing, not direct to consumer, but we essentially provide a layer of professional liability insurance to attorneys who are employees. And then we also have a policy covering independent contractors who work through our system. So that is often a scenario where, you have a small firm and they have somebody writing a brief for them or going into court for them. And we provide insurance for people that work through our system for those things as well.
I think that's great. And I think that that's something that, have you always had that? Because I feel like that's something I was really concerned about when I looked back in the day. And I was always a little bit nervous about all the things that I felt like I would have to be in control of myself. I think maybe it was also the other stuff that comes with a job, like benefits and all those things, which I assume are not offered. So those are things that people do have to take into as costs of being an independent contractor.
Yes. And that's where, again, we have the independent contractor product, and that's often used by people that do have their own firm set up or have they will have insurance, but they won't have health insurance benefits through us because they're not our employee. So that's definitely something that a decision people have to make when they set up their own, freelance practice or law firm, if they are going to be doing independent contractor work. Benefits are a huge issue. And unfortunately, this is something I've been advocating for and doing a little bit of work on, but the Affordable Care Act was amazing for the freelance economy as a whole and provided a really important safety net for people wanting to do entrepreneurial things. And with the repeal of that, I do think that a lot of people in law and other places wanting to set off on an entrepreneurial path will probably be thwarted based on their ability to access health insurance, because the Affordable Care Act made it possible for people to have access to health insurance. Not that they were getting it for free or not paying for it, but it allowed them to actually not be denied for a pre-existing condition. A lot of people, myself included, could never get a health insurance policy before the Affordable Care Act without being part of an employer plan.
That's a really interesting point, and I think one to be considered when people consider going down this path. Completely. I guess the other side to that question would be, what can people expect to make? How much can people expect to work? Like, is there plenty of work for people who are kind of eager to work full time, or is it ebb and flow in such a way that it's not reliable enough to make it your full time source of work?
It really depends. We have a lot of attorneys who are working full time through our system and have been for over a year. And a lot of it depends on the skill set and the timing. As we grow and we get more clients, we obviously have more jobs and are able to keep people busier. Our dream is to one day have a critical mass of huge volume, a good part of the market on our platform of law firms and in-house legal departments, so that there will be, as much freelance work as there is in the market available to attorneys. But I will say it's a risk and it's a challenge right now, as any freelance career, entrepreneurial career is. It's definitely, you definitely have to be entrepreneurial when you take a path like this and be willing to make your own luck and look for multiple sources of work. So we do have some people who are employed full time through us, and some people that take multiple projects through us and keep their dance card pretty full. And then depending on skill set, we have some people that can't do that solely through our platform. So my advice to people looking to make a freelance career would be to, go all out on all fronts, work your own personal network, and, sign up with Hire and Esquire, sign up for basically a bunch of different other agencies as well. Attorneys tend to prefer to work through us, but obviously we don't have all of the business yet at this point. So I think that attorneys wanting to do this really have to look at themselves as something of a small business and really look at how they're going to put their career together to be employed full time. I know that we do find a lot of attorneys working through us who have a side business or are transitioning in their career, so they don't want full-time work, and we've become something of a supplement for them. So I think those are the different types of people that are working through our system, and our goal is to have enough work to keep everybody employed full-time, but I will say we're not quite there yet.
Well, it sounds like you have a lot of exciting things to come and that you're doing really great work over there. I'd be interested to know, do you still practice at all?
No, I don't. I definitely my legal background has come in handy with organizing the company. We have quite a few of our own lawyers at this point. So managing our counsel and making, contract decisions and other things, it's really come in handy. So in that capacity, as I wouldn't call it practicing law, but having a legal head from a business perspective has been really helpful. But my schedule has been so crazy. Through most of my career, I always did pro bono work, and startup life is working 90 hours a week and no evenings or weekends free. So the past couple of years, I haven't even been able to squeeze in any pro bono work and actually get into court and do anything.
Well, that's unfortunate that you haven't been able to do that. But I take from that you've kept your bar, that you're still barred to practice.
Actually, I am currently inactive.
Oh,
because
I'm having time to do it.
I have not had time to get my CLEs in. The past couple of years have been so crazy, and I've had no time for anything at all. And unfortunately, and again, not even having time for pro bono work, I've gone inactive. I do plan on reactivating at some point once I'm working 50 hours a week instead of 90. But that's probably another year or two away.
That is an insane schedule. Is that long days every day, or is that kind of concentrated during the work week? I guess being an online platform, I would guess it isn't, but what does your lifestyle look like running this startup?
So we have a team right now of 13 employees, 13 core employees, in addition to the people that work through our platform, and a CEO. I am basically the chief manager of a lot of these people of our team. You're setting strategy, you're managing people, you're making sure everything works. I'm still very involved in sales, and then I'm also fundraising. So I usually wake up at 5 or 6 a.m. and I'm pretty much working all day until I fall asleep. And the weekends are usually catching up on things and that you didn't get to during the week for fires. I also travel quite a bit. We have 3 offices across the country, and I spend time at all of them. And I also meet with our clients in different parts of the country. So I spend a lot of time on the road, and then when I'm not on the road, also working and time with everybody virtually and remotely. So it's a pretty insane lifestyle, but I think it's probably not that dissimilar from associates who are tasked with billing 2,400 hours a year and have to travel a lot for cases that they're on.
That's fair. I can't even imagine. I traveled quite a bit as a younger associate just because of the industries in which I practiced. None of them happen to seem to be located anywhere near New York. But now these days I don't travel as much for work. So I can't imagine what it's like to work across 3 different offices across the country. But I'm very impressed.
Thank you.
What about your current life would you say is most surprising?
So I think what most surprises me from 10 or 15 or even 20 years ago, I think there's good surprises and there's bad surprises. So the good surprises, I never guessed that I would get to do something like this. And I meet so many interesting people every day. I get to work with amazing people. I love our team. I love our investors. I love our clients. And I never would have guessed that I would get to do something this cool. Yes, I always assumed I never wanted to grow up. I always assumed being an adult was really boring and you were stuck at a desk and had a boss. And so that I get to do this right now. And where the world is at this point with, I do think that we are in the middle of a technological revolution. And I do think that entrepreneurship in many ways is one of the defining factors of our generation. So to get to be in the middle of that is really exciting. And I think that just how the world works now and being a part of that, even though a very small part of it, is something that would have surprised me 10 or 15 years ago. The not so pleasant surprise part, I think my younger self would be very dismayed to see how much I work and how little time there is for other things. So I think that's the bad surprise. But again, you take the good with the bad, and being able to do this is really a privilege. So it makes up for some of the time constraints.
I have 2 initial thoughts to that. First, I completely agree about the technological revolution, and I think you really are at the leading edge of that. I mean, the latest stat I've heard is that by 2020, 40% of the labor force will be freelance or telecommuting in some capacity. Mm-hmm. And I think the numbers are actually going to be much higher than that based on my own experiences.
Yes.
And I love your perspective on kind of how busy you're working now. I think it can get really daunting for people who think that the busy time is going to last forever, whether that's as a junior associate or as a new mom or as the founder of a startup. If you think it's always going to be like that, you can get really discouraged. But hopefully, you're putting in the work on the front end in each of those cases to kind of build something that will one day pay off, tenfold and give you a little bit more freedom than you would have otherwise had.
We will see. I think that being a business owner is intense. It gets better. The more senior leaders that we hire at the company, the better the lifestyle becomes, I would say. A few years ago, I was sleeping 4 hours a night. So it's better now that we have a bigger team, because I used to, when the team was smaller, I did more jobs basically. So it's definitely a struggle in some sense. And then depending on the amount of funding your company can get, it also determines how long the very intense period is, because the more money you get, the more people you can hire, and the more senior people you can hire, and the more your schedule you have, 1, 2, 3 intense years and things die down. The scrappier you have to be, the longer and slower the intense period is.
Yeah. Fair enough. I mean, it sounds like you have a great attitude. Having just spoken to you for the last half an hour, you seem to really love what you're doing. And I think that that's, as you said, a privilege. Not everybody gets to love what they do or even like what they do. And there are lots and lots of people who work really, really hard at really terrible jobs.
Yes.
So it's great that you have a sense of gratitude about how you get to spend those hours. So I know that you were talking about growing the platform, but is there anything else coming down the pipeline over at Hire and Esquire? And what's the best way for people to follow more about what you guys are doing and learn more about what you're up to?
So I think the most exciting things right now are our growth and our technology. So from a growth perspective, we are having new clients sign up online every day, which means more jobs and more projects in the system. So every week, our platform grows and we have more law firms and in-house legal departments and more opportunities available for attorneys. So I think people can expect more of that growth. We have a few partnerships and other things in the pipeline that will further expand those opportunities. So that's one thing that attorneys on our platform can expect. The other thing that is incredibly exciting to me, people who have been with the platform and stayed engaged have probably noticed that we've added more requirements on to being a member of our system and to looking for jobs. And we're going to continue to add skills tests and further assessments. And why this is exciting is because these are all a part of our matching algorithm. We launched a very basic matching algorithm and recommendation engine 5 months ago that keeps getting smarter and better. So it helps to recommend attorneys as our clients are searching for jobs and specific skill sets. So attorneys who are best suited for that type of organization and that type of job will emerge. And we're not just looking at pure skill sets. We're doing different things with personality testing and candidate assessment that determines the best cultural fit for the firm. So we're really excited about attorneys being more exactly matched with better opportunities that are more suited to them. We look at things like work style, work environment, if people are introverts, extroverts, and a bunch of other data points. And what I'm really excited about is that since we launched this technology 5 months ago, 30% of our hires have been from system-generated recommendations, or to say it another way, whenever there's a system-generated recommendation, our law firm and in-house legal departments are accepting that one of the candidates that are system-generated 30% of the time. What really excites me about that is, one, we've truly automated staffing, and we've, in some ways taken it away from a recruiter who has their own biases and reasons that they might not do an optimal job, and more from unconscious bias or other reasons. And from our hires made from system-generated technology, 64% of those hires are women and or minorities, which is way above the average. So I'm really excited about our platform reducing unconscious bias and really truly matching the best candidate who's best suited for the job without any of those, without unconscious bias. So those are two things that I'm the most excited about that are continuing to be developed on our platform that people will notice and will see changes both in their onboarding and likely in the way that they are obtaining jobs through our system.
That's really exciting and so fascinating. I hope that you're collecting a lot of data on how all of that pans out, because I think that's really going to be interesting to see, especially on the diversity front, how the computer generated candidates are able to change the way people hire diverse candidates and women candidates.
It completely is. And what I think is interesting is most people don't want to be biased. So, let's say you're a male law partner, or you're, a male solo, and maybe you have a daughter, you don't want to be discriminating against people. Most people don't. And there's these little things that click in people's heads that technology actually helps to put something of a barrier between those. Just in general, they've found that communication mediated through technology already starts to help. I don't know if it's because people are processing more logically, or if they're not necessarily sitting across from somebody and feeling the same unconscious biases that might kick in. But already communicating over technology is shown to reduce bias. Then you put another layer on top of that where people are used to looking to computers now for recommendations. Like I know I love Amazon's recommendations and I love Netflix recommendations, and most people do. So people are, one, less likely to have unconscious bias through technology. And then when they trust computer recommendations, or they see, hey, this person's skill set really matches up with what I want, it really helps to overcome those unconscious biases that a lot of people don't want to have, and they can't help them, even if they're aware of them. So we found that so far, and again, it's only been 5 months and we have a limited data set at this point, but we found that our hires through our recommendation system and through our additional testing for personality and work styles have created a much higher satisfaction rate with our clients, and they're more diverse hires. So I hope that the data will continue to prove out that way, and it will be a win-win for everybody.
I love that and look forward to hearing more. Well, I'm looking at the time and just want to start to wrap up, and thank you so much for being on the show and being a part of this project. I love that you were able to share your story with us today and tell us a little bit more about what you're doing over at Hire and Esquire. I think it's really exciting stuff, and I think a lot of people will be served from knowing that there's a resource like that out there. But before I let you go, I'd love to know your thoughts on a question that I ask every single guest. And that is, what do you think separates lawyers who are happy from lawyers who struggle to find happiness in life with a law degree?
So I think that lawyers aren't that different from other professionals. A lot of the research coming out and that we've looked into when we look at how to motivate employees and attorneys in our network is that, and then subsequent research has proven that this is mainly true of white collar professionals who have options. But what tends to create happiness for people in work is having autonomy and feeling like they have some control over their work and the ability to make an impact. After a certain income level, happiness levels off and in some case decreases. So I think that attorneys that are able to feel like they have some control and autonomy over their schedule and their work and feel like they're making a difference and doing something they believe in, just like other white collar professionals, are the happiest. Subsequent research has shown that people below a certain education and income level generally are just very happy to have a job, which is also something that I think even as attorneys and anybody who has a certain level of education and has options, we should all be very, very thankful that we have the option to think about what makes us happy instead of just, worrying about the next paycheck.
I love that advice because I definitely am someone who preaches gratitude a lot on this show. And actually a listener sent me just today an article that she read about a new study that came out that said that worry has the effect of activating the reward centers of your brain, because when your brain perceives an issue, worrying feels like a response to that issue. Your brain thinks it's doing something.
Yes.
And one of the ways in which to disrupt that pattern, which lawyers fall into, because we constantly are rewarding our brain with lots and lots of worry,
yes,
is to use gratitude, because it gives the same type of reward to your brain in place of that anxiety. And so I completely agree. And I think science is going to continue to prove that gratitude and really appreciating kind of what you have in front of you will be the key to happiness. So very well said. And thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
Thank you for joining me for the Happy Lawyer Project podcast. Please head over to my website, www.thehappylawyerproject.com, for more information from today's show. While you're there, I'd love it if you'd leave me your thoughts on the show. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn, Facebook, or follow me on Instagram. If you've enjoyed the show, please share it with your friends. And don't forget to head over to iTunes to subscribe and review the show. As you know, each rating helps more listeners find the show and helps me get awesome guests on here for you guys. If there's anyone you'd like me to have on the show, or if you'd like to be on the show, head over to my website and let me know, or send me an email at okema, OKEOMA, @thehappylawyerproject.com. A special thanks to everyone who's left a review, sent me an email, or reached out to me in any way. I appreciate you. Thank you again for spending this time with me, and if you would like to learn more about working in your gift and living your passion, head over to the website for a free gift. Until next time, bye!